speaker is Mike Caldwell from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm the senior staff psychologist at the Mental Juvenile Treatment Center and the other private practice. And he's going to talk about treatment for psychopathy.
Yes, hi. For those of you that have been dying to have a presentation that doesn't have any brain slides in it, you'll be happy now. This will be a little different. I'm going to be talking about a treatment program that is set in a secured, maximum security juvenile corrections facility, the Mendota Juvenile Treatment Center. Is it me? Or this was created in 1995. It was not conceived of as a treatment program for psychopathic juveniles. It was instead created when the state legislature passed a series of Get Tough on Juvenile Crime laws. They decided they wanted a mental health facility available, so they created this. And of course, the funding came from the Department of Corrections to this program. It's a little bit unusual in that it's housed on the grounds of the state hospital, and all the staff are employed by the state hospital, so the day-to-day operation is all run by the state hospital, but the individuals are in the secured correctional net status. And so controlling the money meant that the two large juvenile prisons controlled who came and who didn't come to the program. They 100% controlled it. And so they, not surprisingly, didn't pick out Jimmy, who was sitting in his room crying all day. They picked out Johnny, who had torn the wet cell stuff off of his wall and killed two staff with it, the most aggressive and out-of-control kids they had. And so that's where we started with those kids. The treatment program started out also with starting to do essentially field trials for the juvenile version of the psychopathy checklist. And so that's how we kind of got into the area of psychopathy. These are the results. These are just some of the concurrent information that we have on the PCL as we did it. Now, our process was when a kid was sent to us, and we usually got very little notice that a kid was coming or who he was or any of that kind of thing. There's no pre-screening criteria. There's no elimination criteria. Anything that normally a kid would might be screened out of a treatment program because they have neurological complications, they're not motivated, they're drug addicted. Any of those reasons might be one of the reasons they would send a kid to us. And so no one is ever screened out. The kid can't drop out, and we don't kick the kids out. So they're all there for good. And so these are some of the correlations we have with the PCLYB. Now, because this program had a lot more psychiatry time, we had in the other two institutions when we opened, they had a total of 1,000 boys. And they had about 16 or 20 hours of psychiatry time per week for 1,000 boys. So when they had a kid that was complicated, they would send them to us for medication adjustments and things like that. So we ended up with two kinds of kids coming through. One that was evaluated and had medication adjustments or those kinds of things, might stay for just a couple of days or a couple of months. And then another group where they sent those kids and said, whatever you do, get used to it. We're never taking this kid back. We don't want to see his face again. And those were kind of the treatment kids. Our average length of stay was a year, but actually it broke into two very different patterns. And so what we did was we broke those two groups into the group that stayed most of their time on MJTC, most of their incarceration time was with us, and the other group, the evaluation and assessment group, we called the comparison group. Most of their time was spent somewhere else. Most of their treatment was elsewhere, and they just came to us for assessments. And you can see these are a very criminally involved delinquent group by just these figures. PCL total score between the two groups was about 33. We generally run a mean PCL score for these studies that I'm going to be talking about between 31 and 34. So these are these are kids that have a lot of these characteristics. And you can also see that about half, this is also fairly typical of the studies we've done, about half have either hospitalized or killed a victim. And in this particular study, I'm going to be talking about one of the larger studies we did. About half had also been committed for a violent felony, so attempted homicide, armed robbery, or whatever. So not Boy Scouts. Even though, as you can see in this, that the difference between the two groups was fairly small, which was kind of a surprise because the operating referral mechanism was that they picked out the kids that they thought were just untreatable, and they sent them to us. And they had to be convinced that the kid was treatable in order for them to take the kid back. And so we expected that the less treatable, the less responsive kids would be in the treatment group, the more responsive kids would be in the comparison group that they thought they could work with, so they brought them back. Nonetheless, we decided we would do a propensity score analysis. Very simply, this is a procedure that you can do. What you're trying to do here is you're trying to create a statistical model that models the treatment group assignment process. This is done in an observational study when you can't randomly assign people to groups. And if you can create a statistical model that very accurately mimics that treatment group assignment process, and if there's a bias in that treatment group assignment process, then your model should capture that bias also. And so if you can do that and you get a good accurate model, then hopefully you've got a statistical way to control for that bias. To put it briefly, we did that. We got a fairly good, for those of you familiar with receiver operating characteristics, we got an ROC area under the curve of 0.88, very good. Not quite as good as home pregnancy test, for example, but kind of in that general ballpark. And then now we're interested in whether the program, we started out just interested in whether the program actually reduced recidivism. And I was convinced that it would not, frankly. I was a skeptic. So we followed these kids out for this particular study, I think it was 4.5 years, and we collected the total number of offenses in 3 categories of all crimes, felony crimes, and violent crimes. And we actually collected more detailed information than that I'll touch on. Then we did a simple regression analysis, linear regression, where we controlled for the time at risk because the kids left the program at different times. And we backed out. We were able to track down the amount of time the kids spent in secured facilities along the way. We backed that time out. So we had time at risk where they actually were out in the community. We controlled for that, and the propensity score was built into that. And so you can see that in all three categories, the statistics were that the kids were significantly, the kids in the treatment group were significantly less likely to commit, or had committed significantly fewer offenses per kid. And this is a very consistent finding that we've had. As you go into, if you break out misdemeanors in this first category, we have no treatment effect at all with misdemeanors, especially property crimes, shoplifting and things like that. The treatment effect seems to come with more serious offenses and really is more pronounced with more violent offenses, and violent offenses that included victim injury, it's more pronounced still. And in fact, in this particular study, after the propensity score analysis, we matched each kid with another kid who had the closest propensity score. So we yoked them together. So there's 101 in each group. And what we found, of course, in the follow-up here was that none of the treatment kids had committed a homicide, and about 10% of the other kids had committed a homicide. Total of 16 fatalities in that group. So a very dramatic difference. So that looked as though we could break down we could break off the propensity for violent recidivism, but we know that psychopathy in juveniles seems to be related to poorer progress in treatment, violent recidivism, and more institutional aggression when they're in treatment. And so we were interested in seeing whether psychopathy specifically blocked treatment progress and whether it had any kind of effect that way. So we studied 86 new kids that had not been in the previous studies. We have a very detailed behavioral assessment system in which the kids are rated on up to 10 behavioral scales a day throughout the day, all of their behavior. The average, what we did with that is we took the mean score for the first 3 weeks the kid was in the program as the baseline figure, and the last 3 weeks before he left the program as the release figure. And so we had a repeated measures model there. And we also have, of course, security time, which is when a kid does something like punches someone, they're given a certain amount of security time. We actually don't use security time very much, so we dichotomize that as a security violation or no security violation. One of the unusual things in the program is we don't spend a lot of time punishing the kids, because psychopathic kids have been punished and punished and punished. It doesn't make any difference, so don't bother. So then we split them at the median rather, which was in this case was a PCL of 31. There's 43 in each category. And what we found was we had a main effect. This is repeated measures analysis of variance. We had a main effect for time, meaning that all the two groups got better between the two time frames. There was a significant change in the two time frames. We also had a mean effect for PCL, which means that the kids with the higher PCL scores were worse on admission, and sure enough, they were worse on, really, they were sicker kids, they had more serious behavioral disorders, so yeah, they were worse all the way through. What we did not have, though, was an interaction effect between time and PCL, meaning that the kids with the higher PCL scores made just as much progress, and there was no indication that psychopathy actually blocked their ability to make progress. When we looked at the question of whether the amount of treatment, we considered the amount of treatment as the dose of treatment, and so we were looking for dose effects. So we controlled for a series of values here in the first step. In the second step, we put in the weeks of treatment to predict that final behavior score, the 3 weeks before they left. And sure enough, that was still statistically significant after we controlled for these other variables. And the beta values in that final model, for those of you familiar with that, when you look at that final model, what you find is that the PCL score was not a significant predictor of those final behavior scores in the last 3 weeks, and the amount of treatment was. So that was interesting, but we were still interested in whether that progress in behavior. One possibility, and people have argued this, that even when psychopaths do well in treatment, especially more severe psychopaths, they're just simply conning the program and they're cleverly working their way out, and they're going to be just as bad when they leave. And so if that was the case in this study, then the kids with the PCL should still predict violent recidivism, and the final behavior scores that shows their progress in treatment should have nothing to do with final recidivism. So that's what we looked at. And this was a 54-month follow-up time. This is a Cox proportional hazard analysis, and we simply loaded both of these factors to predict violent recidivism. Cox proportional hazard analysis accommodates for differing follow-up times between the different groups. And essentially what you find was that, again, the PCL did not predict violent recidivism anymore, and the final behavior score in those final 3 weeks did predict violent recidivism. So essentially what you have with this study is the PCL was a very good predictor, very good post-predictor of all kinds of indications of behavioral problems, the age at first onset of behavioral problems, the number of conduct disorder symptoms, the number of crimes, the level of divorce victim injury, and all those kinds of things, how poor their institutional adjustment was, all kinds of indications of behavioral disorder right up to the time when they started the treatment program, and then their progress in the treatment program and their recidivism risk after they left the treatment program were all determined by, no longer by the PCL score, but by factors that were related to the treatment program and their progress in the program. So now we were more interested now at this point. I don't know if I'm running out of time or if I'm doing okay. At this point then, so we're now interested in, let me touch very briefly. We dug a little deeper into this because we were interested in what aspects of psychopathy. Psychopathy is often thought of as having four facets, and we were interested in what facets seemed to be the ones that were most, both accounted for the most change in the treatment program, or were most sensitive to treatment, and also were most related to recidivism. And what we found when we dug into that was that, unlike some other studies, the F1, the emotional factor, was the most sensitive to treatment progress, and the interpersonal facet of the F1 factor, which has to do with conning and using people and those kinds of things, not so much callousness and the emotional components, but the willingness to just use people and throw them away, was both most related to violent recidivism and also most related to treatment progress in the program. So at least in our program, we don't think we take these kids and make them, warm, fuzzy, empathic, Mother Teresa look-alike award winners, that kind of thing. We just make them a little less willing to manipulate and to treat people as if they're newspapers or something disposable. So now we're interested, though, in are there characteristics, does the program actually change characteristics of psychopathic personality inside the kid? And so we're now, we just submitted this under review. 93 new kids. You can't use the PCL to look at, I just shut that off. There we go. We can't use the PCL to look at repeated changes in characteristics. It's a lifetime measure. So we use the antisocial processes screening device, a device that's based on the PCL developed by Paul Frick. And we collect that and a whole series of tests every 90 days as the kid goes through the program. And so, again, we have repeated measures analysis of variance. What we find is, in the total score, we have a significant decrease in characteristics over the 180 days in the total score. The same with the callous unemotional symptoms. And it's interesting to me, I don't know quite how to get at this, but that the second 90 days is where we see the biggest change. Impulsivity is more kind of uniform across the board. And in narcissism, though, the first 90 days we see relatively little and not a significant change. It's all in the second 90-day time frame. Now, this actually fits with our model, what we think we're doing in the treatment program, in which we change attitudes and some control issues first, and then downstream from that, once the kid's behavior and aggression is under control, you might start to change more basic personality characteristics like narcissism and that kind of thing. But it's not, it has to come after you get the kid's behavior basically under control. When we looked then at whether these changes had anything to do with the changes in behavior in our behavioral system, the same behavioral system that in the previous study predicted violent recidivism, we found that after we entered the admission scores and all of that, the final APSD total score predicted the final behavior score, as did each of these. And again, narcissism was the weakest in that category. We have small numbers of kids. When you get past 180 days, we have relatively small numbers of kids who still are there at 270 days and so on. So we have a little bit of a power problem as we go out. And we also we're working in a natural setting. And so just getting the clinical staff to actually make sure each of those kids gets that test is sometimes a problem. But we have pretty good luck in those first 180 days. I see I've got 0 minutes. So I'm ready to take questions if anyone has them. Yeah. Am I taking it?
2 questions. It would be helpful to get a sense of what you're doing with these kids. I mean, what's the content of this program and why you think it shows these effects. But the other thing I can't resist throwing in here is I don't understand the ethics of this. I mean, if you're doing human subjects research and you're trying to see whether this intervention, which we'll hear about, works, but these kids are stuck there and there's no exit from the program, I don't get it. That violates the sort of fundamental tenet of human subjects research. So maybe you could address both.
Yeah, let me start with the second one first because I can see the confusion. It's not human subjects research. This was a program that in the juvenile corrections system in Wisconsin. The 2 juvenile prisons have units, and they move the kid to those units if they decide the kid needs to be there. This is one of those units. So it's a secured corrections facility. We don't do anything. All of our PCL scores and those kinds of things are scored from the admission information that is routinely collected on every kid. So that in that respect, it is all archival research of data that's collected in the treatment program in general.
So you consider your intervention fully validated? I mean, aren't you doing research on your intervention?
In the sense of it's observational. It's an observational study, so we aren't. We started out creating a program that we thought would work, but it's not an experiment in the sense that you're thinking of. I don't know if I can
describe what you're doing.
Yeah, the program. It's hard to describe in a short time, but. The people who planned the program had worked a lot with individuals who were extremely difficult to treat and violent individuals. And so there are certain principles, guiding principles that you apply to that. One of them is that we don't use much in the way of punitive sanctions. We don't, you need to have a very detailed assessment of the problem that you're trying to treat. So you have to have some objective measures about what it is you're trying to treat, and that's where some of the behavioral component, the behavioral assessment system comes into play. We also, otherwise it's a fairly standard adolescent mental health unit in terms of having a multidisciplinary treatment team that formulates a treatment plan on admission. We do family work, we have medications, we do all kinds of things. But there's nothing that we do in order to, there's no exposure to the kid or changes to what would be done with a kid who's been sent to an adolescent treatment program. In other words, we're observing how the program works, but we aren't manipulating the program to test things. Actually, I kind of wish I could manipulate the program sometimes, but we don't do that. Yeah.
So there are a lot of us who object to the application of the label psychopath or psychopathic to people who are still juveniles.
Yeah.
Because one thing that I think it connotes, particularly to juries and other laypersons, is a kind of intractability in their criminal behavior that then would warrant especially punitive sanctions.
Yeah.
And as you know, increasingly DAs, the prosecutors are having PCLs done on the kids, and they're introducing that into evidence. Your study suggests that it's not an intractable condition at all.
Right.
Kent's data suggests that when you look at the brains of juvenile psychopaths, they're not all that different from the brains of non-psychopaths. So it seems to me that this adds to the case that would be made to not permit the diagnosis of psychopathy in people who are still young because of the stigma that it may convey.
I could not agree more. I think one of the implications of these data is that it is certainly possible that psychopathy, if it exists, does not crystallize into a condition until sometime in adulthood. And I think one of the interesting things in these data is that we don't see that, we have not identified an upper age limit where the treatment program is ineffective. Now, kids usually leave our program about age 18, but the kids that are older actually tend to do better than the kids that are under age 15, which is a little different than what you see in some settings. So whatever that age is where it crystallizes, we don't know. It doesn't seem to be there at age 18 based on our data.
Have you identified a PCL level where the treatment's ineffective?
To my surprise, no, we haven't. I've been shocked at that. The question is there a PCL level where the treatment seems to be ineffective? And the answer seems to be we haven't been able to. Now, one of the odd things about these data is that we have in the study I just showed 246 kids. We only had about I think it was 14 that scored below a 27 on the PCL. So it's a very skewed sample. It's only a 10-point range or so. We haven't had any 39s or 40s. So it's a fairly narrow range. But we haven't found a top score that blocks it. Yeah.
And this may be something that's obvious to the rest of the people in the room, but not me. Could you say a little bit more about the treatment? I still don't understand what you did.
Yeah. The program is based on a model that we developed with adults that were extremely difficult to treat, self-injurious and aggressive individuals. There are a couple of characteristics. For example, we don't allow the kid to withdraw from treatment by being aggressive. What happens in a typical juvenile correction setting, kid punches another kid, he goes to security, he may be there for 3 or 4 days, they have a hearing, they assign him to a certain amount of security time and so on. It's required as part of the administrative code that we do that. While the kid is supposedly in security 23 or 24 hours a day, we have our staff go in, we do our tutoring sessions, we do our one-to-one sessions, we play games with him. He's not alone very much out of that time. And so we don't let him kind of pull out of treatment. We don't break that. We see that a little bit like saying that, if you have a cancer patient and they relapse and have more cancer, they're kicked out of the program because they got the symptoms that you're supposed to try to treat. So that's one aspect. There are other characteristics. The program has to be very developmentally sensitive to adolescents, and so we try to make all of we talk to kids mostly about the next 24 hours, pretty much, not too much in advance. The rewards have a quick escalation to them, so the kid's behavior today determines his privileges tomorrow. To the extent that we can, we have a menu the kid can choose those privileges from. So a very quick turnaround. A kid can have a very bad day on Monday, pretty good day on Tuesday, on Wednesday he's at the top privilege level. We have a rapid escalation in privileges so that a kid who has 3 or 4 straight good days has a new set of positive privileges that he keeps for a week, no matter what his behavior is, just like we don't lose our bank account or our house if we get arrested for a minor crime. So there are a number of elements that I think that are important to the way the program works, but it's similar to some other programs like MST. We don't have a workbook. We don't have a tight protocol that we work from. We have a series of guiding principles that we work with, and then we do a lot of individualization to apply those principles. And so one of the problems with translating this to other settings is we don't work with that kind of 12-week, 5-step kind of operation.
In the last part, the treatment makes people worse. So what's the difference?
A couple things. One is that I think most of Kent didn't have time to get into the one study. There are, if you look carefully at those studies, there are very basic mistakes that have been made, as in like research methods 101 mistakes that probably are fatal mistakes that probably explain their results. I personally don't think that any of those studies are even minimally convincing that treatment makes psychopaths worse. And I think that, I think if you look at those studies reasonably carefully, you can see problems with the way they operationalized the dependent variable and handled that. So.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much indeed.